Good morning, friends, and welcome to another episode of PB Reads the Bible. Who's PB? Me. I am Pastor Brian, pastor here at Christ United Methodist Church in Waynesboro. And thank you for joining me. It's good to be together. It is good to be together. This is another episode of PB Reads the Bible, and it's episode 2 on our journey through the book of 1 Samuel. The book of 1 Samuel is what we're looking at. So yesterday we did a little background on it, and went through the chapter 1, went through the first chapter. So today we're going to take a look at chapter 2, which I'm going to break into 2 pieces when I get to reading it. We're going to read chapter 2, verses 1 through 10 to begin and talk about that a little bit. Then I'll read the rest, and then we'll break that down as well. But for now, just good morning, hello, good to be gathered together. Good to be gathered together. Go ahead and check in. I see that somebody already did. Maureen did. Good morning. This beautiful sunny morning. It is a beautiful sunny morning. Public service announcement. PSA: wear your sunglasses, people. It's very important to protect those eyes of yours. Protect your peepers. So good morning, Maureen. Good morning, John. Good to have you this morning as well. I know some folks won't be joining us live this morning. They'll be watching this as a recording some other time. So if that's you, go ahead and check in anyway. I like to know who's watching or who has watched and all that. Also use the comment section for any comments and questions. If you have questions about something, ask it. You can also send me a text for either of those things, 570-351-1619. Also invite you to go ahead and share in the comment section or through texting any prayer requests that you might have, so that we can all keep each other surrounded in prayer and lifted up in prayer. We're sharing life. We're living life together, which is always a good thing. Always a good thing. So let's see, any announcements? I don't think I have any announcements for you for today. Like I said, we'll be live again tomorrow and Thursday, and taking, of course, a break for Friday and Saturday and Sunday and Sunday's worship, which we'll talk about maybe tomorrow or Thursday. I'll give you an announcement about that. So that'll be it for announcements. Not much else to talk about. So your question for today, and I think actually this might be our question for this week. A couple of weeks ago when we were doing this, the question was, how is it with your soul? Which is good. And I don't remember if I told you where these questions come from. They are from John Wesley. His brother Charles and some of Charles's friends at Oxford had created a little group, a small group. They had this small group where they were doing various spiritual disciplines, Bible reading and prayer and stuff like that. And they were working on their discipleship. In other words, that's what they were doing. They were being teased by others, and they were called the Holy Club. Others gave them that epithet, but they took it and ran with it. Yeah, they were derisively called the Holy Club, but then they claimed it. And then they were derisively called Methodists because they were so methodical in their approach to everything. But they grabbed that name and ran with it as well. That's where the name Methodist comes from, because they were so methodical in their stuff. Oh, good morning, Cheryl. Good to have you joining us this morning. But the one day Charles went to his brother John and said, "Hey, John, we've got this little group going. We want to go deeper. We want to go deeper, and we want to work on our spiritual lives and our connection with God, our relationship and all that, our discipleship. Can you give us some questions to be asking of ourselves that could help us?" And John said, okay. And the next day he shows up with 21 questions for them to be asking themselves and each other, because they were keeping each other, I hate to say in line, they were holding each other accountable. And so they would ask these questions not only of themselves, but publicly ask them of each other. I said 21 questions. Some people say 22. There are a couple different lists you'll find. So it's 21 or 22. The list I usually use is the 21. So anyway, that's where our question from a couple of weeks ago, how is it with your soul? Today, and this week, let's use this one for this week. I'm sorry I didn't ask it yesterday. The question is, am I proud? Okay, that's going to be the question for today, for this week. Am I proud? Now, what is pride, of course, is the question. And St. Augustine once said that pride is the love of one's own excellence. That's pretty simple and yet profound at the same time. Pride is the love of one's own excellence. We might say it's thinking better of yourself than we ought. It is not the same as a healthy self-esteem. It's not the same as a healthy ego. It's fine to think good of yourself and be and like yourself and acknowledge your own abilities. And that's different. To have self-esteem, a good healthy self-esteem, is a good thing. Pride is not the same. Pride is different. Pride is like that, the love of one's own excellence. So pride ends up making you think of yourself as superior to others. We take comfort in knowing that God loves you, but God loves others just the same way. So we should never think of ourselves as better, superior to others. So as you think about this, maybe a couple of scriptures that might help you in your reflection, if you want to go a little bit deeper with this thought about am I proud? From Psalm 139, verses 13 and 14, and from Ephesians chapter 2, verses 4 through 10. Those might help you if you want to go a little bit deeper as you ask yourself that question, am I proud? And that will be our question for the week. So, 1 Samuel chapter 2. We're going to pick up from there with the song of Hannah. Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exults in Yahweh. My strength is exalted in my God. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory. There is no holy one like Yahweh, no one besides you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For Yahweh is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble gird on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who were hungry are fat with spoil. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. Yahweh kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. Yahweh makes poor and makes rich. He brings low, he also exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are Yahweh's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might does one prevail. Yahweh, his adversaries shall be shattered. The Most High will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the power of his anointed. Pause. Ooh, wonderful, beautiful. This is a beautiful poem, beautiful song. Now, the very first words say it's a prayer. But she didn't just pray; she sang. You can see that in this lyric piece. Now, this piece does have similarities to several different psalms, several different chapters in the Psalter. A couple it's very close to. It also has an echo in 2 Samuel with a song from David. But even more, it is echoed by Mary in chapter 1 of Luke, after the Annunciation, in the beautiful piece we call the Magnificat. So at some point you might want to compare these two. Go ahead and look and see how similar they are. So what do we need to know about this prayer, this song of Hannah? Well, thinking back to yesterday, to 1 Samuel, to chapter 1 of 1 Samuel, and her response, we can see that she even calls God, gracious, that God had opened up her womb. And so in response to the grace of God, she finds it necessary to praise God and to sing to God. It's hard to argue with that. Can't argue with that, actually. That is or should be our reaction to God's grace, a reaction of praise and worship and of singing, even if we can't sing. We should still sing out, to God in response to God's grace. So we can see in these 10 verses that that's what she's doing. She is responding to God's grace. We can see in this as well that we can read it at a couple different levels, and especially in a couple different sections. We can read it at different levels. We can read it as that surface level, strictly about Hannah and what's happened to her. But we can also see in it Israel. We can see in it Israel and Israel's treatment of God and treatment by God, and to some degree, we might even say forecasting, the future, foretelling the future. All right, so let's look at it a little bit, because in verse 1, which is wonderful, but if you were following along in the NIV, you probably noticed a difference in what it said there. A couple different differences, actually. Let's go with the second one first. My mouth derides my enemies because I rejoice in my victory, is what the NRSV says. The NIV says, my mouth boasts over my enemies, for I delight in your deliverance. So deliverance and victory, understandable, two, basically synonyms of it. But there's that my versus your, the my versus your. They're using two different sources. It's not that one gets it right and one gets it wrong, okay? Because my and your are two entirely different things, are they not? And I don't know if the one word can be translated both ways. Maybe, I doubt it. But the NRSV is using, they're using two different resources, two different documents when they translated this. The NRSV group was using a Qumran text. Qumran was basically the Dead Sea Scrolls in that area. So it's a text that was discovered in that area. And that one uses this pronoun my, uses the my possessive pronoun. Whereas the NIV is using a different text, something referred to as the Masoretic text, which is probably not quite as old. The Qumran text is probably the older of the two texts. So perhaps it's the more, it's a little bit closer to the original, perhaps, and perhaps it's the more accurate of the two. Not a big difference, perhaps, but we could say, I certainly understand why the NIV chooses to use the your rather than my, because it says this is a prayer, this is a song to God, and she is proclaiming your deliverance. But I can also understand the NRSV's using of the word my victory. Yes, she's proclaiming God. She rejoices in the victory, and by saying she's rejoicing in my victory doesn't mean that she's claiming it all for herself, because it's, right before that she's giving praise to God. but it is her victory over her enemies, but not through her hand. And she's not claiming that it's from her power, because this whole thing has to do with that contrast between the power of the individual, the power of Israel, the power of us trying to do things on our own, versus the power of God. And it's going to directly address the power of money, the power of power, right? Those kind of things, versus the power and the will of God. That none of those things can really stand up if God's power is against them, and we're going to see that very in the great reversals of her song. Now, just above that, in the earlier part of verse 1, the NRSV says, "My strength is exalted in my God." In the NIV sticks with the imagery of the Hebrew and says, "My horn is lifted high." Now, horn was a symbol for strength, but don't think of a horn like a trumpet or even a shofar, that kind of thing. Talk a literal horn of an animal. That's where the analogy, that's where the imagery comes from, is a horned animal, and that's their power, that's their strength, and especially being lifted up. Okay, so kingdom of the world versus kingdom of heaven, perhaps. Oh, and the great reversal. Yeah, that's probably an accurate way of putting it too. Yeah, relying on our power, the powers that are listed there, versus the power of God. Cheryl is saying the kingdom of world versus the kingdom of heaven. That's if you see it that way, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's that idea that if God's will is against those powers, they're not going to stand, and the things that we think are very powerful are really very weak in this different way of thinking. Cool. All right. So they're using this idea of this imagery of a horn and lifting up, a horn and lifting up, which also had numerous images throughout it, because of strength, this strength or this horn at the time would be considered children, especially male children. And so there's that imagery in there as well, being mixed in. But we're going to see later. In fact, let's look at it right now in verse 10, the very ending of verse 10. Looking at the NIV, because the NRSV says, "The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king." It's sticking with that idea of strength, which is what horn does mean, but it's the imagery is different. And exalt the power of his anointed. But in the NIV, it says, "He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed." In which case there, because the horn was also a symbol for king. Okay, so, and anointed, yes, it is the Hebrew word Messiah, but we're not talking Messiah. This is a more generic use of the word. Over time, the word Messiah came to mean, the Lord's, does mean the Lord's anointed. And when we hear that, though, we automatically think the ultimate Messiah, and we think of Jesus as the one who is God's anointed. But as we go through Samuel, we will see that there were numerous anointed ones. There were numerous Messiahs before that. And we're going to see she's really talking about, even though she doesn't know it yet, she's talking about Saul and she's talking about David, both of whom were anointed by her son Samuel as God's chosen ones, to be the kings, But so we're looking in here, and you can see all these great reversals. Things that we think are powerful aren't when they come over it. The barren has borne 7 children. The barren has borne 7. Obviously, she's at least metaphorically speaking about herself. Now she uses the number 7, which, if you follow, numbers are very symbolic, and 7 is a number of completion, like the 7 days of the week, of 7 days of creation. Good morning, Kelsey. Good to have you joining us this morning. So she doesn't have 7 children. We're going to see, but she does have children, more than just Samuel. In fact, she has another 5. So she has a total of 6 children. But don't let that tie you up, because that number 7 isn't supposed to be literal. It's that metaphorical complete number, and a complete number. But the point is, the one who was barren, regardless of how much effort they had, and it couldn't do anything about being barren. Only God could. And God completely reversed it and made the woman who was barren now have multiple children, versus the one who has many children is forlorn. And yeah, maybe that's kind of a dig towards Penina, but it also might be, we can read this for Israel versus the enemies of Israel, the other nations, that they will be forlorn because of the way they treated Israel. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. So we're seeing all these great reversals taking place. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low. He also exalts. Not our power. It's not us. He raises up from the poor. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are Yahweh's, and on them he has set the world. Right. So all these great reversals, and God, it's because it's within God's power to do those things, not within the powers of this life, the powers of earth, the powers of ourselves. And his adversaries cannot stand. Yahweh, his adversaries shall be shattered. The Most High will thunder in heaven. Okay, so we can see all those things. And like I said, compare that with the Magnificat in Luke chapter 1, following the Annunciation to Mary by Gabriel. And you'll see many very strong similarities between the two. She speaks about all those reversals as well. All right, so now we're going to turn to verse 11. We'll pick up from there. And we'll probably read the whole thing and then break it down. Maybe I'll stop as we go. I don't know. We'll play it by ear for now. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah. Pause. I am going to pause as we go along, because if you remember, chapter 1 didn't say Ramah, right? It said Ramathaim. So they're changing the name of where he's from. But of course, that town may have been known by a different name. However, Ramah comes up again later in 1 Samuel. Don't try to make them the same place. They're 2 different places. Okay, they had multiple towns with the same name or very similar names, and that can get confusing. Then Elkanah went home to pause, and it only mentions Elkanah at this point. It doesn't mention Hannah. So then Elkanah went home to Ramah, while the boy remained to minister to Yahweh in the presence of the priest Eli. Pause. So Eli has fully re-entered the stage, right? He did briefly at the end of chapter 1 when they brought the child. Now they're leaving the child with Eli, leaving Samuel with Eli. Who else is going to return to the stage? His 2 sons, who were only mentioned very briefly towards the beginning of chapter 1, will now be mentioned more fully in this chapter. Now the sons of Eli were scoundrels. They had no regard for Yahweh or for the duties of the priests to the people. Pause. Scoundrels, I should identify what it means. Wicked men. It's actually related to the adjective, the word, the verb, the noun, whatever, that Eli had used in reference to Hannah when he thought she was drunk.
But so they're being described as wicked men. It's worse than oh, you scoundrel, you. You know, this is worse than worse than what we would typically say about a scoundrel. Wicked men. In fact, that's how the NIV translates it. Not that scoundrels is an incorrect one, but wicked men is probably more, it has that stronger sense to it more than. They had no regard for Yahweh or for the duties of the priests to the people. When anyone offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the one who was sacrificing, "Give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." And if the man said to him, let them burn the fat first and then take whatever you want, whatever you wish, sorry, he would say, "No, you must give it now. If not, I will take it by force." Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of Yahweh, for they treated the offerings of Yahweh with contempt. Pause. So what's going on here? Well, it was permissible. It's legal. It's in the scriptures that when the people bring a sacrifice to God, the priests are allowed to stick in a fork and pull up, and whatever pulls up, they keep. But they're doing it too early. Obviously, the longer you're boiling stuff, the softer and the more it's going to fall apart. Well, it specifically says while it's still boiling. So they're doing it before they're supposed to. They're going to get huge chunks, if not even the whole thing, coming up on this three-pronged fork, rather than the smaller piece that they're supposed to be willing to accept. The other thing they're doing is they're sending their servant to do it. They're not even doing it themselves, sending their servant to do it before they boil it, before they burn off the fat, which was contrary to what the law stated. It was supposed to be, the fat was supposed to be burned off first, giving a pleasing aroma to the Lord. And which is why the people say, let us at least burn the fat off. Let us burn off the fat. But they're threatening violence if people don't do what they want and give them more than they're supposed to be getting. Excuse me. And like you might say, the better stuff. Fat gives flavor. And they're treating the offerings of Yahweh with contempt. Continuing, Samuel, pause. Now, remember, he's still a child. He's still a child. He's just a child. But continuing, Samuel was ministering before Yahweh, a boy wearing a linen ephod. His mother used to make for him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. Then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May Yahweh repay you with children by this woman for the gift that she made to Yahweh." And then they would return to their home. Pause. There again is that word ask is coming out in multiple. The asking of which she asked to the Lord. And then they would return to their home. And repay is like that lend, that giving back, the lending to what God has lent to her and given to her. So it's more play on words that we're not getting. And again, using that asking has that verb tense of Sa'al. So it's like inserting Saul into here a little bit as well. And Yahweh took note of Hannah. She conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew up in the presence of Yahweh. So we're seeing it's going kind of back and forth between Eli's sons and Samuel. And we're seeing the contrast between the two. Eli's sons are ignoring the law. They're showing contempt for God and for the offerings that are supposed to be presented to God. But we're seeing Samuel serving before the Lord, in the sanctuary and wearing a little ephod. And we shouldn't think of that as the official ephod, because it's not Aaron's ephod with the Urim and Jurim or whatever it is on them. It's just a little white robe, basically, little white robe, and over something to put over top. But we're seeing this contrast between the two, and he's growing up in the presence of Yahweh, and they seem to be, of course, distancing themselves from this presence. Now Eli was very old. He heard all that his sons were doing to all Israel. Pause. And where it says sons, pretty sure that's where it is, says it's literally boys. It's the same word for Samuel, but not because they're the same age as Samuel. They're obviously much older, but with reference to how they're behaving. They're not acting mature. They're not acting as men. They're acting as boys. Now Eli was very old. He heard all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who served at the entrance to the tent of meeting. He said to them, "Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings from all these people. No, my sons, it is not a good report that I hear the people of Yahweh spreading about. If one person sins against another, someone can intercede for the sinner with Yahweh. But if someone sins against Yahweh, who can make intercession?" But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of Yahweh to kill them. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with Yahweh and with the people. Pause. So again, it's back and forth between Hophni and Phinehas and Samuel, and we're seeing this, huge difference between the two. Everything that they're doing wrong, and the people are talking about it. They're noticing it, right? But for Samuel, the people are noticing how good he's doing, right? So he is growing in stature before the people and the Lord, but the sons of Eli are receding, in they're shrinking in the eyes in favor of the people and of Yahweh. It says they would not change their mind because it was the will of Yahweh to kill them. Again, of course, that's the time that this was written. That's how they would have literally understood it, that God is in charge of everybody who lives and dies, and how they die and when they die and all that. But it also, we can see in that sort of the idea that, throughout this is something new is going to happen. Something new is going to be taking place. There was hope for Hannah. There is hope for Israel. But in order for the new to come, the old must die. The old must die, and the old must be just cut off. So we can see that as why it says the Lord, it was the will of God to kill them. It was the will of Yahweh to kill them, in order to make that break with the old complete before beginning the new one. Okay. So verse 27, a man of God came to Eli and said to him, "Thus Yahweh has said, I revealed myself to the family of your ancestor in Egypt when they were slaves to the house of Pharaoh. I chose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to offer incense, to wear an ephod before me. And I gave to the family of your ancestor all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then look with greedy eye at my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded, and honor your sons more than me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel?" Pause. So Eli had taken note of the sins of Hophni and Phinehas, all the things that they were doing wrong, and he confronted them about it. But God is saying, you didn't try hard enough. You didn't do enough. Maybe God is saying you should have started earlier. You've waited too long to do it. But God is also seems to be including Eli in these sins. Perhaps that he thought more of his sons than he thought of God. and he thought it was more important to appease his sons than it was to worship and honor God. And perhaps because he was, and particularly that fattening yourselves on the choicest parts, that he was benefiting from his son's sins. Okay, we can see that. We can see that in there. You were fattening yourselves on the choicest parts, not just your sons. He's including Eli in this as well. Continuing, therefore, Yahweh, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that your family and the family of your ancestors should go in and out before me forever. In other words, be priests before me. This would be like the establishment of that particular branch of the priesthood. To me, I read Aaron in this because of the talking about the ephod and stuff like that. Others read Moses, because of course Moses went in and out before God, even before Aaron did, much more often than Aaron did. But that, so in that line, it would be this constant. There would always be someone from that family line who would be this priest type thing. But now Yahweh declares, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me shall be treated with contempt. Pause. So what God is saying is, my promises are my promises, and my promises are good, and they're not. My promises aren't going to stop. However, promises that God makes to others, the promises that I make to you, come with some responsibilities on your side, and I cannot honor someone who does not honor me. I just can't do it. I just can't do it. Your children are despising me and showing contempt. Well, I cannot honor you any longer. Continuing, see, a time is coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your ancestors' family, so that no one in your family will live to old age. Then in distress, you will look with greedy eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed upon Israel, and no one in your family shall ever live to old age. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep out his eyes and grieve his heart. All the members of your household shall die by the sword. The fate of your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be the sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest who shall do according to what is in my heart and in my mind. I will build him a sure house, and he shall go in and out before me, before my anointed one forever. Everyone who is left in your family shall come to implore him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread, and shall say, please put me in one of the priest's places, that I may eat a morsel of bread. Pause. Okay. End of chapter. So we got through that chapter. So remember what I said yesterday about when this was written and all that stuff, that it was actually written well after the time, hundreds of years after the time. There were probably some oral stories that were written, were shared, but then it was written down and things added to it by various people over the years. And we can kind of see that in some of these things here. So don't think of these as outright predictions of future events. They're mostly things that sort of a recording of things that had taken place by the time they were written, because these were written just before, during, or just after the exile, somewhere in that area, and possibly all three of the above, and put together until it got to its final condition, final edit draft of after the exile. So who are they referring to as far as this one priest who is going to live to an old age and die weeping out his eyes? Most scholars believe that he is speaking about Abiathar, who was made priest under Solomon, I believe, but then was removed from his office by somebody, and then he had nothing. And who is he talking about as far as a faithful priest who shall go in and out before my anointed one forever? He's probably, most scholars believe they're referring to Zadok,
who was much later in time, and was a priest that was allowed to go in and out before the king. That would be his anointed one before the king forever. All right. So we'll pick up from there tomorrow with looking at chapter 3 of this book. So my friends, I do pray that this has been beneficial to you, that you've learned something or relearned something, that God has spoken to you in some way through what we've read and what we've said. As you go about your days, not just today, but every day, keep those eyes and ears, both physical and spiritual, open to everything that God is doing, our living, loving, active God is doing in your life and the lives of those around you. When you see it, when you hear it, say, thank you, God, and then tell somebody about it. Until we meet again, my friends, be blessed.